Unit 2, Migration. Content objectives for these video notes are 2.5, discuss reasons why people migrate, and the second, 2.6, explain where migrants are distributed. Your ICANN statements: 1. Compare and contrast net in and net out migration. 2. Identify and explain push and pull factors to migration. And 3. Discuss the world flow of immigrants and emigrants. Emigrants versus immigrants. Emigrants are those that are coming into a country, where immigrants are those that are leaving or exiting out of a country. Net migration is taking the difference between those that go into a country, which is immigrants, and those that leave or go out the country, immigration. So you take net in minus net out, and it will give you whether or not it's a positive or negative number. If it's positive, that'll be a net in country, and if it's negative, it'll be a net out country. Push and pull factors, reasons for why people migrate. All right, diving into push and pull factors. Let's just keep in mind that in the United States, we have about average family moves about every 6 years. Really, 3 objectives are the reasons why they move. One is economic reasons. That's the most popular and common reason for emigration. And it also is because of bettering life and bettering opportunity, bettering quality of life, which coincides with the job. The second is cultural factors. Those are more prevalent in the 21st century with climate change. Those are people that are forced out, or I'm sorry, not climate change, I apologize. Culturals are people are also referred to as political reasons. Those are refugees, those that are forced out of a country because of harsh, oppressive conditions that are usually imposed by a political government. The third is environmental reasons, the most popular in the 21st century with climate change. And this is because of hurricanes, earthquakes, typhoons, landslides, tornadoes, etc., natural disasters that, according to many scientists, are more prevalent in the 21st century. Immigration to Minnesota, we can see this is an older statistic, but when we look at overall immigration stats, we can see that total immigrants come from less developed regions, which are the dark maroon. Where are immigrants distributed? Well, as I already mentioned, they're sending from less developed regions such as Asia, Latin America, Africa, and their receiving regions are the more developed regions. Those are going to be North America, Canada, United States, Mexico, and European, most notably Western European countries like England, Germany, France, Belgium, Switzerland, Monaco, Spain. And then also we see patterns, and those patterns are from common international migration patterns are from Asia to Europe as one pattern. A second is Asia to North America, and a third pattern is Latin American countries to North America. And then most Latin American countries follow Ravenstein's closest proximity migration patterns. So most Latin Americans will come from bordering countries like Mexico or El Salvador or Dominican or Puerto Rican. U.S. has the highest number of foreign-born. Here's a flow chart that shows, based on the size of the arrow, that's the immigration flow. So we can see the largest flow is going to be from Europe and Asia to North America. And then we also see a large flow from Eastern Europe and Asia to Europe. Net migration, remember, if it's a net out country, that's how many they get more immigrants coming into the country than immigrants leaving the country. Here shows a history of migratory patterns. These are international migratory patterns. We can see that in the 1820s we begin to see northern and western European countries migrate internationally. Most of those migratory patterns will be to the North America. And then we can see, the United States specifically, as it says on the axis to the left. And then Canada will see increase of immigrants in the late 1800s. And then after, right before World War I, or during World War I, we even see it. The Southern and Eastern European international migrants come to the U.S., and then during the Great Depression, we see a huge lull in international migration to the U.S., and then we go back into the 1960s. This is where we get immigrants from around the world, more specifically Latin America, Central and South American countries, Asian countries, and also more recently African countries, sub-Saharan African countries. All right, let's continue on with content objective, explain where migrants are distributed. These ICANN statements will be define illegal undocumented immigrants and list key characteristics. Secondly, explain the migratory flow patterns of illegal and undocumented immigrants to the U.S. and within the U.S. And then 3, define chain migration and brain drain. And lastly, explain U.S. policy on immigration. Unauthorized immigrants account between the numbers of 12 to 15 million. 80% come from Latin American countries. Again, following Ravenstein's closest distance, and his second principle of Ravenstein is traveling to major economic centers. So many of those immigrants from Latin America will be going to major cities for economic pull factors, seeking employment. Many of them will be working in primary sector jobs, so low-skilled jobs such as construction or food services or farming, agriculture. They represent 5% of all U.S. labor. The migratory patterns, again, the largest by this flow chart is from Mexico. But when we look at the Caribbean, we can see that we get a large number from Cuba, which migrate to Dade County in southern Florida and other southeast regions in Dominican and Haiti. And then we can see the largest flow from immigrants from South America is Colombia. Undocumented immigrants follow a pattern of close proximity to emigrating countries or net out countries. And the largest net in currently is Texas, and the second largest net in is going to be California, and the third is Florida, currently in 2020. Where do they settle? When we talk about settlement, they'll be in close proximity to where they emigrated from, as I've mentioned several times. And again, they'll go to economic centers. Asians along the Pacific coast through Angel Island and near San Francisco. And cities, major cities that are going to be, later on we're going to learn they're going to be major world cities such as New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, and Miami, Houston. Those would be all economic centers where we see migration going to. And then chain migration is when you have family members follow other family members over. And so they have community or family ties to one another. And usually with chain migration, they use step migration. They leave their country of origin and stop at another place temporarily, then move to another place temporarily, then they move to their permanent location. That's step migration, which is common with chain migration, following family members. We can look at the distribution of Hmong. Many came as refugees in the early 2000s. We can see the distribution of Hmong on the east side of St. Paul is the largest concentration, extent of spread, and also the highest arithmetic density. And this gives us a dot diagram, so we can also see that Hmong is found in Hennepin County and the northeast region, and then Ramsey County, as I already mentioned, East St. Paul. And we look at Hispanics. Hispanics, we can see an enclave or a concentration and highest arithmetic density in South St. Paul. Maybe some of you have traveled on Cesar Chavez Boulevard, and you can see through toponyms that there's the cultural landscape of Hispanic ethnicity. And Hispanic Latino residents, you can see that there's mostly concentrated in the two large urban areas, both St. Paul and Minneapolis, for economic pull factors. When we look at preferences that don't meet our quotas, the United States allows over 750,000 to immigrate in the U.S. That's the current quota. These are exemptions from the quota. Exemption would be reunification with the family. It can be refugee. It can be skilled workers that are of low supply here in the U.S. When we take in those low, and this is the most common form of preference for admission, the skilled workers come with, usually when they come, they'll have a green card or temporary visa, and many in the classes I've had workers that come through skilled workers admission that work at 3M or Ecolab. But this leads to brain drain. The countries where they originate from are less developed, where we see high natural increase rate, high infant mortality rate, high crew death rate, and they diminish the skilled workers, which hurts their economy from their country of origin. Average wait is about 5 years to gain legal admission into the U.S. And other exemptions to the quotas are the refugee status, providing a safe haven from political oppression, and then chain migration, family of citizens. Internal migratory patterns, we see an interregional migratory pattern between the 1950s and 2000, people moving from the Rust Belt, so the northeastern large cities like Pittsburgh, Detroit, Flint, Cleveland, and heading south to the Sun Belt. Some of the causes would be the International Continental Rail or the International Highway System, and then also the air conditioner. And then we see urban to rural, so we see intra-regional migration, moving from urban cities to suburban areas, which is outline metropolitan areas. And that's really 1950 to present. And the reasons for this movement is advancement of technology and jobs moving from the urban core out to suburbs, and the International Highway Act, which creates white flight, so ethnic demographics follow, where the white ethnicities concentrated in high arithmetic density in the suburbs, and the trend is currently growing. Here we can see the population center of the U.S. shift from the east to 2010, where now we see it in western or southwestern Missouri. And the population center is telling us where half the population is resided in both coasts of the U.S. So we see more and more population moving west and southwest. And this gives us the net migration. We can see out-migration in the Midwest and the northern cities, parts of the Rust Belt, which would be northeastern United States, the Rust Belt, and then we can see the net in is highest out west. And then we begin to see now emergence in the south. And we'll talk about that later. All right, and then here shows you the movement to the south because of the Interstate Highway Act, and then also the invention of the air conditioner. And then we can see migration movement through the decades of 1995 and 2010. This has led to urban sprawl. We've learned that since the 1950s that most of the migration in the state or in the country of the U.S. has been intra-regional migration, moving from cities to suburbs, which leads to growth of suburban outlying areas, which creates a homogeneous landscape, which can eat up farmland.